The Met Department has warned, be careful, because in this current rains, what you're going to see is especially areas around the Lake Nyanza Basin, the Nyanza Lake Basin, you're going to see a lot of water. The rivers will overflow. This will invariably lead to what? To the displacement of people.
Yes, it will.
Page 10 of the Standard today is talking about that. Several counties are on the edge as floods wreak havoc, leading to loss of lives and displacement of people. This is happening as heavy rains continue to pound parts of the country. In Narok, 4 family members died following a landslide at Ololunga after a night of heavy rains. Hundreds were displaced in Kisumu and West Pokot counties. The developments are bound to test the preparedness of counties to handle emergencies after similar floods last year left a trail of destruction and loss of lives. Yesterday, residents of Ololunga village were still struggling to come to terms with the loss of members of one family. Narok South Sub-County Deputy County Commissioner Felix Kisalu said the mudslide occurred at night following heavy rains experienced in the area. Kisalu led a team of disaster management to the scene where the bodies were retrieved and they were moved to the Narok County morgue. This is happening countrywide.
Yes, it is. And just from all indications of what we've seen, that this is going to continue. The call is to ask that as much can be done. In terms of preparedness by nature of definition means that you would have done it prior to the incident. But in this case, now we're looking at mitigation, aren't we?
Yep.
And can we fault and say that we didn't prepare? Yes, we can. Because did we receive early warnings? Yes, we did. The weatherman talked about severe rain and sent out a warning, the first of which came in December. Just looking at some notes. And then another one came in February, end of January to the first week of February. To tell us that rains would come in April and last until June, and that they would be heavy in nature, and that there would be the possibility of the things that we are seeing today. So, early warning systems are in place.
Yep.
Preparedness for such things, not so much.
Let's find out. We have invited, and he's joined us, the Secretary General of the Kenya Red Cross Society, Dr. Idris Ahmed, is our guest. Good morning, Dr.
Good morning.
Good to have you here.
Thank you.
Welcome to the hot seat of the Situation Room.
Thank you.
There's a lot that the Kenya Red Cross has been doing over the very many years on this particular matter, on floods, on various emergencies and disasters in the country. And we just want to understand, from your perspective, how we are doing as a country in terms of preparedness, in terms of mitigation, in terms of communication, in terms of response, in all matters. But I want to first welcome you with the day's proverb. I'm doing this on behalf of our colleague C.T. Muga, who's away today. But he had done the research and told me the proverbs for this week are from the Kingdom of Morocco. And today's proverb specifically, and I want you to listen and give us your interpretation of it. If you have to beg, beg the rich people. If you have to beg, beg the rich people. What's your interpretation of this proverb?
That's a difficult one because the only person that you beg is someone who has more than you. So will it not be factual? Look, I think the understanding is in terms of association, you need to associate with people who are better than you in terms of skill sets. And the idea is that if it is learning adding value will added by someone who has more than you, and not necessarily in terms of wealth, because begging, or most of the time the risk is you interpret it from a wealth perspective or a money perspective. I think the idea is being more strategic around the people who you interact with, the people who you rely on, and just get a person who is better than you are.
That's a very good one. Establish a social network that builds you. That's a very good one. Very good way of looking at it. Asante. Now, Kenya Red Cross. Every time we see anything matter of disaster, we expect and we actually end up seeing Red Cross officials on the ground. You have handled many things. You've handled fires, you've handled emergencies, you've handled medical emergencies, accidents, and now floods. Let's talk about the current situation. The short rains of October, November, December, is that what they are?
Yeah.
Yep. We saw the flooding that happened, particularly in the northern parts of the country and along the coast. Now again, we are seeing a new fresh wave of heavy rain, floods, displacement. Are we prepared? Were we prepared for what we are seeing now?
Yes, I think maybe let's understand the context and then we can get to answer the question of whether we're prepared. So the rains for October, November, December rainfall were, above normal rainfall, meaning that not really normal, and that's what we had the long debate of El Nino, no El Nino. And the idea is that from that time we understood that the October, November, December rainfall one will last longer than expected. So in terms of the period, how long we will be receiving, it will be longer than expected. And so the cumulative interpretation of that forecast was that there will be a connection between the October, November, December rainfall and the March, April, May rainfall, the short rains and the long rains. There will be very little period for recovery. And so that's what now we've witnessed. We haven't had, we've barely had a period of dryness in the country. I think last night I mentioned that it's just a few weeks ago that the population who were displaced from the previous rain season, October, November, December rainfall, just went back to their homes. And now they're preparing to get back to displacement. So the season, this particular connection of these two seasons is unique because of the El Nino phenomena. So are we generally, I think, prepared? Look, we have come a long way in terms of our early warning system. And by the way, your last comment was spot on. The Kenya Met Department capacity to do the forecasting has improved dramatically over the last period, number of years. And so we're getting information, early warning information on time, spot on most of the occasions. Even with this particular season, by the way, the March, April, May season is a difficult season to forecast. So you don't have a huge lead time to understand the exact impact compared to the October, November, December rainfall. But we got good information early enough because of the El Nino phenomenon, as you said. Now, where our weakness is how to link the early warning information with the response system, the preparedness system. And second, also to answer the question of are we prepared, even that we've come a long way in preparedness as a country. I remember when I started my career, it was extremely difficult for the country to preposition material equipment. These days it's becoming more common to preposition equipment, to preposition supplies that are needed. But the scale of the impact, I don't think we can be prepared enough. And so, Eric, the infrastructure destroyed from the last season, we've not had enough time to repair and recover. And now we're dealing with a context in which the rainfall, the effects are being felt in a system that has already been destroyed by the last rainfall season, which now brings me to the main point that affects our preparedness. We're living in a context in which the risks that we are facing have become so systemic, overlapping each other, and each risk affecting the capacity to deal with the upcoming risks. So as a country, generally, our vulnerability has increased huge because of successive disasters, moving from drought to floods and floods to drought, and that cyclical nature of emergencies.
Okay. Can we see, I mean, you've talked about improvement when it comes to early warning systems, and we've seen that. I think that we saw that there was a prediction of El Nino. We saw that there was a prediction of, heavier than usual rainfall, and then what would happen as a result of that. You talk about an improvement in preparedness as well. We did see that there was especially from the Red Cross, that then there was talk of what to do in certain areas. In Kenya, where we deal with several different governments, and I'm going to talk about the county system here, whereby there are certain counties or there are certain areas that are more prone to what would be disasters as a result of where they are situated geographically, right? Have we been able to make a link between what we know, and I'm going to call what the weatherman says will happen, and what ought to happen to protect people and livelihoods? Have we seen that has been connected?
I think there's a major weakness in that one. So let's start with a constitutional problem. So disaster management in the country is a shared responsibility between the national government and the county government. Means there need to be a high level of coordination between the two levels of government. And the major weakness we've had in terms of that coordination is lack of an effective legislation around disaster risk management. So that has been a major weakness in terms of unpacking the constitutional structure for risk management, disaster risk management. There is a process that has been started now. There's a bill in Parliament. I think it's gone through the second reading. So we hope once that passes, then there'll be a solution in terms of ability to coordinate between the two levels of government and all other actors. So that's the first point. The second one is we've been very weak in linking our disaster risk management strategies with the long-term development planning for the country. And I think the major challenges that we have in terms of risk management, disaster risk management, are developmental in nature. So unless we get that clarity in linkage between our development planning and the risk management architecture, then we'll always be playing a catch-up game, and that's the reality of what is happening. And then the third level of weakness, I think, is now operational in nature, linking between budget allocations on an annual basis at the county level, at the national level, with the risk management strategy. So we don't have sufficient resources that are available for disaster risk management as a country. But in any event, I think that is part of a bigger problem, that the level of resources that are going to development in the country is really small, since we have a huge recurrent expenditure. So what is the impact of these three facts? That in a number of ways it leaves a lot of room for improvement on what we can do as a country in terms of better preparedness, better planning for our response, and actually better response to the emergencies.
But then we know where our weaknesses are, and we've known this for very many years. Something as simple as having that harmonized legislation that creates a harmonized response structure between the two levels of government. Why don't we have that in place? Even before devolution, there was an attempt at having the National Disaster Management Authority or something of that sort established. That thing just died. Why?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think historically this is something we got wrong. The first time we published as a country the disaster management policy was in 1998 after the bomb blast. And since then we took a very long time to adopt that into policy. And now, by the way, to be honest, it baffles many of us on why it hasn't happened, because the goodwill has been there, the discussion is there. There's really every emergency we reflect on it, we say we have a major weakness, we'll find a solution, but it just hasn't happened. I'm more optimistic now, to be honest, because one, the policy has been adopted, so it's in place, the legislation has been drafted, is going through the readings. So the question to the answer, why have we not done this for over the many years? There are many possible responses, but just that we've missed it as a country. And by the way, a country like South Africa learned from our draft policy that we took in 1998, adopted the legislation, amended several times, have a strengthened system. So it's something that historically it's a blot, by the way, in our
surely, history. And something as, in my opinion, as simple as having an authority established to then deal with disaster management then seems to be a teeth-pulling exercise. We got this one wrong. But
there's something about saying we got this wrong, Idris. If we don't understand why we haven't been able to do what we all clearly know we ought to be doing, well, we have seen others coming and borrowing from our brains and going and running with it, and it works. If we don't understand why, if we don't become completely honest with this conversation about why we haven't done it, then even what we are doing now will not succeed. We have to actually sit back and reflect and ask ourselves, why? Is it because of commercial interests somewhere? Is it because of political interest somewhere? Because there has to be something. You're an expert on identifying risk. This is a risk to the implementation of what you're saying now is hopeful.
Yeah, you have the huge point, by the way, Eric. Good point to the wrong person. The reason why I say to the wrong person is I am not speaking on behalf of government, but I speak on, authoritatively as someone who has been within these circles for a number of years. When I tell you we got it wrong, it is an acceptance that at the end of the day, this should not have been the case.
Yes.
Now, to point at the exact problem on why we didn't adopt, which is, as you say, it baffles you, baffles all of us why it hasn't happened. I can't actually point at any real reason why it shouldn't have been done, other than the fact that at the end of the day, when we look historically, we just accept that we missed opportunities. It came with cost, and in the future, this is something that we can really avoid. So let's now get to the idea, the point that you've made. Those reasons, if we do not analyze, if we don't find a solution to it in depth, then it will affect any process in the future of even having a strengthened legislative and institutional architecture. Yes, that is a concern. That's a blind spot that if we don't pay attention to, then at the end of the day, whatever legislation we affect will just go back to the same problems: inefficiency, lack of coordination, and wastage of resources.
Kenya Red Cross is actually recognized in law, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
What piece of legislation is it?
Kenya Red Cross Society Act. So Kenya Red Cross Society is a statutory organ. It was established under an Act of Parliament adopted in 1965, so the Kenya Red Cross Society Act. And so it gives us a very unique, by the way, status. One, we are a public entity established under law, but we are independent of government, and that independence is not a myth. It is actually reflected in the content of the act itself, that we are independent of government. But we have a unique auxiliary relationship with the public authorities, meaning we work with both the national government and the county government to as a secondary institution to support them, complementary to establish a complementary mechanism to the government mechanism of disaster risk management. So we have by law an obligation to have a strengthened disaster risk management architecture in the country.
Are you funded in any way?
So no, not for a very long time, and so until last year, when His Excellency the President gave the directive to say, as a public entity, we are required to be given funding because we are discharging a public mandate. The case was that no, we were not receiving funding from the Exchequer on an annual allocation. So historically, we've received some money for particular responses to support government, but it's only last year that we got a proper policy direction to receive resources from the Exchequer on an annual basis.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So the questions are many today in terms of what we're talking about. The rains have been, intense for a couple of weeks now in certain parts. And then we've seen people already displaced. And the questions are then, so preparedness, what level of preparedness really has there been? And we're talking about right now, present situation. And then what would happen in the future? Because we're seeing that these rains will go well into the month of May.
So I'll speak about our preparedness and then just make a comment about the preparedness around the general humanitarian organizations and government. We understood from the word go we will be facing this scenario. So our planning architecture and our response mechanism never stopped from the previous rain season, the El Nino, October, November, December rain period. So we continued to put in place our measures, various mechanisms. So we've prepositioned all our supplies. As we speak, we are ready for a displacement of up to 20,000 households countrywide, meaning our supplies, temporary shelter, material that is required by population displaced up to 20,000 households. We will be comfortably dealing with that. So our staff are in place. We have activated our emergency response units all over the country who are ready for search and rescue, support mechanisms, who are ready for, setting up of displacement camps and working with government collaboratively on that. We prepositioned our medical supplies, our program, protocol, and response is active and in place and already being utilized. I think the last 2 weeks we've been very busy on search and rescue mission. So just trying to support communities that are either cut off from the rest of population, people who are at risk of drowning, and saving them. Now, in terms of the rest of the country, the humanitarian coordination mechanism is also active. So at the UN level and other actors, so it has been in place to discuss how we are going to respond to these emergencies and allocate specific resources. The same thing for the government under the leadership of the Deputy President who was chairing the committee on responding to the flood. So that mechanism is also active and in place. Now, Eric, I think it is important that I make this comment. Irrespective of how much we are prepared to respond to emergencies, what we have to understand is that the sheer volume of the waters that we are dealing with, it is difficult to control. So there is going to be destruction, there is going to be displacement of population that we can't avoid. Let me give you, for you to understand the quantities of water we are dealing with. This week, Tana River, the volume of water changed from 2.4 meters, which is an acceptable normal levels of the river, to above 5 in 2 days.
That's double.
Yes, exactly. In 2 days, the total volume of the river doubled within a period of 2 days. Because the highlands, central Kenya, have received above 120 millimeter rainfall consistently for a period of about 4 days, 5 days. And so we're dealing with a huge amount of water. What will test us is when people are displaced and as they're getting displaced, whether we will have sufficient level of support to make the displacement more comfortable. I think that is where the test of the preparedness mechanisms are going to be in place. And finally, and I have made this comment consistently, irrespective of how prepared we are as institutions, if as the general public we end up having all these misadventures we end up having with waters, the risks that we are taking, people trying to cross flooded spaces, fast moving waters, it just gives us a lot of work for no reason. So I think there is also an obligation to the general public. We already have enough on our plate as it is, so please let's be just more careful about what we do.
Dr. Idris Ahmed is the Secretary General of the Kenya Red Cross Society. He's our guest, telling us about the preparedness, the level of preparedness across all the humanitarian organizations and the coordination that they are receiving from government, and then also creating that most important awareness on the people what to do in this time, because it's gonna flood. You don't know where, you don't know when. What should you do? What's the coordination framework currently in place for disaster response? Is it on a case-by-case basis? For example, we have one which was set up in place for El Nino, and then that has gone on into the rainy season. Maybe it was the same one that was addressing the drought situation. If we had another thing today, if we had a fire, huge fire, if we, God forbid, we had a terrorist attack again, a major one, is there one coordinating framework, or are they established on a need basis?
So largely so far our experience has been very ad hoc. So we set up some coordinating mechanism depending on the emergency. And you're right, so what was set up during the El Nino response is likely to continue for responding to these particular rains. But there's also other government structures that are in place more permanently that are meant to help in coordination. So the National Disaster Operations Center is a center established under Ministry of Interior, primarily obligated to coordinate response to emergencies, especially quick onset emergencies. And so that's in place. The question will be the level of resourcing and the general investment in the center itself. In terms of slow onset emergencies like drought, we have the National Drought Management Authority that is established also under an Act of Parliament, and it's supposed to provide an architecture for coordinating preparedness and responding to drought as a particular risk. But the conclusion generally is that, as we said, a lot of room for improvement in terms of setting up a standing and coordination mechanism for disaster risk management, which is what we hope will be sorted out through this legislation that I had mentioned earlier.
At present, do you find sometimes you find yourselves at Kenya Red Cross working at cross purpose with another humanitarian organization that's responding to the same disaster? Let's say, for example, the ongoing floods, Tana River, the rise in the waters of the Tana River, definitely that's going to cause an issue downstream. How many other humanitarian organizations are working in that region? Are you coordinated? How well are you coordinated?
So the humanitarian, and this is globally speaking, I'm not just talking about the country. Humanitarian work is a global industry. It's big business also. And so the level of interest that are there within that particular industry is huge. And that makes it more prone to duplication, more organizations working in the same area with very little coordination in other areas, so undersupply in some areas and oversupply of response in other areas. And this is, by the way, a global problem. So just to give you an example, as we speak right now, there are two major emergencies globally. Sudan as an operation, the conflict in Sudan is a major humanitarian operation. The conflict in Ukraine is another major one. Just within the International Red Cross appeals, Ukraine is 220% funded. Sudan, on the other hand, is 9% funded.
On the humanitarian level?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
It's 9% funded. So this is a global problem, this coordination, duplication, working across purpose and so on. So at the county level, we are meant to have a steering mechanism called the county steering group that coordinates which organization does what in a particular county. So it's not as disorganized as it appears.
But you said we are meant to.
Sorry.
You said we are meant to have a steering committee. So, does that mean that there is none?
There are some counties where they can be strengthened in terms of how frequently they meet, whether they are meeting the purpose of the steering groups, whether they're actually coordinating the NGOs in the area. But also meant to, in the sense of many humanitarian organization NGOs are also not willing to submit to that coordinated mechanism. So it's also a problem on our side for those of us who are operating in these areas as humanitarian organizations. So it's a question of whether they are doing their job to start with and whether we are allowing them to do their job. So we are thriving also on a bit of that confusion that exists.
Well, it's almost as though you're taking a gun and you're pointing it to your head. You don't know where the bullet is in the chamber, and that you're hoping that every time you click, it's not that time. And that's what we're doing with this disaster every time, because it's rain. Okay, maybe it will not be 100 centimeters of rain or 100 inches of rain, whatever, and that it'll dry up at some point, and then we can go back to school, and then maybe a few months. I think it's playing Russian roulette with a situation that can be sorted. But the question is, if proper preparedness was to take place, like you've mentioned, would we, and we always need to draw the line, don't we? Can we draw a line between proper preparedness and the reduction of the damage? No, not reduction in the displacement, for example. Reduction in the disruption of certain processes like schooling and, care, hospitals. Because if schools are flooded over, nobody's going to school. Can we draw a line between the two? Because destruction, we cannot solve that. But the repercussions of that destruction, can we reduce the severity of them by being prepared? Can we see that we can draw the line?
So, by the way, the best strategy for responding to planning for a disaster is prevention. So you put in place mechanisms that prevent the damage as much as possible and the negative impact as much as possible. That is our obligation. That's the obligation we all have in that industry. It is not to prevent the hazard or the risk from materializing. It is to reduce the impact on the general population. population. So if we have better coordinated mechanism for preparedness, that is what we achieve. We achieve, to reduce the negative impact of the disaster on the general population. So people will be displaced, but at least we have planned where they get displaced to, where we host them, where we provide medical attention, how we continue providing schooling. But let me just also clarify this one. It would not be correct to assume that we will reach a stage where for every emergency, irrespective of how prepared we are, that there'll be no disruption on the lives of people. The idea of all disasters is that it causes disruption.
For sure.
Yeah. And so what we need to prevent is where people's lives completely go to a standstill, where no children go to school for months, where no healthcare is provided to population displaced. That is what we are targeting to prevent. And by the way, Eric, and I say this not because I'm trying to put an optimistic outlook. As a country, we've really improved on how we do that. We are not there yet, but we have improved. I remember there is a time when people displaced, there was no possibility of accessing education. Right now, whenever people are displaced, we're even having a discussion of how the education services continued even in that context of displacement. Yeah.
So it is possible. And I think this is the thing. Oftentimes we can have a conversation. Well, somebody should have done, and we say, okay, well, we can't because there's not adequate, movement of resources. But what you're saying is that it actually can be done.
It can be.
Pre-planned, you will know that there are schools in particular plains that will essentially be flooded over. Yeah. But we can move, and we can say we can move to higher ground, or we can move to, drier ground, and the school, or rather the education process, can actually continue because we're going to move people anyway.
By the way, we're making very poor use of data. And so the issue is now, in part of my team, there's a team whose role is just to do that, to look into historical data and give us prediction on what is likely to happen. And now with the application of science, it is very much possible to know with this amount of rainfall, this millimeter of rainfall in this place, it is likely to flood in this area. That science is there, it is in place. Now, the gap is, once you've understood that science, and we know, if it rains 60 millimeters for 4 days in the Narok area, Narok town is going to flood. That much we know. It doesn't need a person from outside to come tell us what is going to happen. The question is now, what do we do with that information? And there are three sets of problems. One, as a country and the general public, we are very pessimistic about early warning information.
That's our culture.
Yeah, it's a cultural problem. Right now, we've sent messages to. I'm sure, Eric, you must have received a text message from the Red Cross just telling you it's likely to rain in your area. And these text messages depends on where you are. We're having an excellent collaboration with Safaricom, where we mark areas, we give them the areas that we want to send early warning information, and depending on the telephone lines that are operating in that area, will receive a specific message. This week, we are asking residents in Tana River who are closer to the river, the low-lying areas, move up at least to higher grounds. But the response is, no, we will wait for the waters to come. And so we end up receiving calls 2 days from today, come rescue us, we are marooned in this place, we're stuck in this. So the first problem is that cultural thing on how do we react to early warning information. The second thing is that how do we allocate resources so that we can plan in advance. Our emergency financing mechanism waits for people to get displaced before we can allocate resources. And this is a global problem, again, from the donors to also the public resources that we utilize. Crying wolf does not get you resources to act in advance, and that's the second problem. There's very little resources that are available for acting in advance. And the third one is that we're just not making use of science. There is a huge gap between science and the practice. So you have people who are giving us early warning information, and then the rest of us who are supposed to now put in place the practice mechanism, we are not doing as much as we should do. So we need to find a solution for those three. It's a public responsibility to understand how to deal with risk, to be responsive to early warning information. It is our responsibility who have resources to allocate resources, especially the government, for advanced preparedness. And it is the obligation of those in practice and scientists to have more discussion and more often.
Other things that you also respond to include security concerns, right?
Yeah.
And of course, we've been seeing Kenya Red Cross being roped in. Right now, there's an ongoing security operation, 6 counties, right, in the north. And Kenya Red Cross has been involved in whenever there's an attack, we hear what Red Cross walikuja wamesaidia and this and the other. What's happening on that front?
So, remember the comment that I made earlier. These situations are interlinked, and so conflict reduces capacity of communities to deal with other emergencies, including floods and drought. So it reduces the resilience. Floods reduces the resilience of communities to deal with drought, to deal with conflict. The sad part is that as a country, it is these same communities that face conflict, disease outbreak, floods, drought. The communities in the north, the arid and semi-arid areas, and that's what makes it unfortunate. So in some areas, then it creates a very complex situation where, because of insecurity, it is difficult to even respond to emergencies such as floods. It affects movement, it affects ability for aid to be moved, and so on. So the first point is there's that interlinkage. But yes, as a country, we are also responding to the humanitarian situation that is resulting from insecurity. We have an active operation in Baringo, humanitarian operation in Baringo as we speak, supporting displaced communities affected by the conflict and violence in that area. In fact, we are the lead agency from a humanitarian response in Baringo. The same situation for other parts of the country where there are incidences of insecurity. We also provide emergency response, evacuation, and so on. So we're primarily being kept really busy in the entire country.
What are we likely to see over the next, couple of weeks? We're in the middle of April now, and we know that the rains are going to increase in some parts. Those are people being moved, or more people be moved, or... and what are we hoping to see then also in terms of coordination in different parts?
So the peak of the rainfall, by the way, is the end of April. So this month we are going to witness the highest quantities or amounts of rainfall expected. And the next few days also will be very, very wet. The second related to it is we are likely to experience the spilling of the dams, the 7 Forks, the next couple of days. There was an early warning information released by government. And once that happens, it means the volume of waters in Tana River is going to increase dramatically. So we're expecting huge displacement in Garissa, Tana River, the Tana River basin as a whole. So we are likely to have more people displaced in the next couple of weeks. Our planning scenario is working with 30,000 households displaced, which is a big population, and largely around Western Kenya, in the Tana Basin, the Nzoia Basin. We are also likely to see more mudslides in the central highlands and these areas that traditionally have received huge rainfall. So, by the way, we're really concerned about the amount of rainfall generally in central Kenya. It's huge. It's really, really, really huge. So that's a second concern that we have. Of course, the secondary effects are also what we are concerned about. When it rains, the road traffic crashes increases. And so we've been witnessing the last couple of days many of these accidents, slippery conditions resulting in poor visibility and so on. So there are also the secondary smaller emergencies or disasters, road traffic crashes, but cumulatively, by the way, that are resulting in huge numbers of people dying. So if we combine that with risk of waterborne diseases, then we will be, it is a complex situation that we're anticipating towards the end of this month. More displacement, more people affected, more waters, more people who are going to be in displacement camps.
What should happen to change people's attitudes towards receiving this information, early warnings, and taking action? It's not the first time. I remember even the last time West Pokot, was it the governor or was it the regional commissioner then, Natembeya, saying, look, we gave people warning that you are likely to see a mudslide and a landslide here. They refused to move. Somebody who is living right at the edge of a cliff and saying,
we're not moving. Nothing will happen.
Yeah.
How can we change people's attitudes?
that's a good one. That's a good task for behavioral scientists to take in place. But there are compounding reasons why people don't take early warning information seriously, and one of which is that over a period of time we've never taken the truth of early warning information seriously. And once you doubt whether what we are even saying is true, then people will not respect that. You remember some years ago, whenever the meteorologists speak, people will say they are lying. They said it's going to rain and it didn't rain. So that attitude has been ingrained over a period of time. So I think the more people realize the science of forecasting has improved and the Met is spot on in their forecasting, then I think over a period of time we will have more trust.
They become more
But
believable.
second, we have to give people faith. That we are not just asking them to move, to get displaced, but we are giving them options around their movement.
Yes.
We're providing sufficient clarity on where they move to, what kind of situation they anticipate when they move, try to make it as comfortable as possible. We are not going to, create a life that is as comfortable as your own homes, but at least you know that, the suffering will be reduced of living your own homes. That's the second one. But the third one, I think we just generally have to change our risk appetite as a country. And this is cumulative. You see people rushing to, fuel tankers that have fallen over and so on. So we seem to have a very high risk appetite, and we're not taking safety seriously as a country. And that I don't know what to do about it.
I take the first 2 points that you've made. And this is creating a trust framework. Okay? So over time, if, for example, the Kenya Met would tell us it's going to rain at 3 p.m. and it rains at 3 p.m., then tomorrow if they tell you it's going to rain from 4:15 p.m. tomorrow, you'll be prepared for it.
Do you trust Kenya Met now, Eric?
I don't even understand their message. I've told the boss of Kenya Met here, their message is, areas, highlands,
high
lowlands, west of
low
west,
probability.
is going to high probability of increased rainfall.
Winds.
It doesn't tell me anything, right? So I can see, it's rainy season, it's going to rain, okay? Ndu and I joke about the weather every day here. When we step outside, she tells me it's going to rain about 4:30 p.m. I'm like, yeah. Wherever you will be, it will be raining at 4:30 p.m. You see? And that's the same attitude we have about the authorities. The second thing is, of course, when you tell me there is a disaster coming, we want you to move, and you don't tell me where to, then I have no action to take. I have no information with which to take action. Move.
To where?
So you've not told me that this area where you are is risky, but this area is less risky. You can then move here. And when you move there, you will find us ready for you. Then I will not act because you're telling me, Uko kwenu kutanyesha, move. Now, surely, where do you want me to go? From Kimana Loitoktok, where do you want me to go to Emali? Do you want me to cross over to Tanzania? What do you want? Do you want me to go to Taveta? Where do you want me to go? You're not telling me. Those two. If you can improve on those two, the other one of the risk appetite
Yeah, really. That will be our task. I think we are investing huge time as an organization to get that part right. So right now, by the way, we've developed a detailed protocol depending on different regions where the holding places will be. And as I think we are committed as an institution to provide a solution for the second problem, a clear framework working with government in which we support people through displacement processes. Just having ready shelter spaces where we accommodate, when we talk about move to high grounds, we've already predefined what those high grounds are. So we have gotten this, by the way, right in Budalangi. So Budalangi, we've actually last year simulated a major exercise of full displacement of the entire population. And we just went through, when we say move to higher ground, what do we expect? Which are those schools you move to that will hold you? Which are those spaces? What kind of work do you expect? And we hope to roll this back also in other parts of the country, the Tana Basin, these areas that there is general displacement. But there are huge lessons learned. When people know where they're moving to, there are higher chances that they will listen to early warning information.
With all the information that's required, I think that has been, because it has been partial, and so folks are not ready to make a defining decision with partial information. Because there are very many systems that are concurrently running. School for children, where are we going to market? Where are we going for 1, 2, 3? If there's an emergency, where will I go? Where's the nearest medical facility? So if you're not telling people that essentially you're going to lift systems with them, the likelihood of them going is they'll rather say, well, let me take my chances with the flood. Because at least I know here where I am. And so maybe that should be a large component of even this response, that information sharing has to be paramount. Because, look, people have lived there all their lives. And that's why you'll find somebody essentially preferring to live on the side of a cliff that might disappear tomorrow, because they are sure at least they can see the house is there. Where you're asking them to go tomorrow, they don't know, in as much as it's for their health and safety.
You haven't said where. You haven't said move out of your home, go to XX primary school. And if you haven't said that, then they actually don't have any information with which to act. But final message in about 30 seconds. You've talked about these areas where we are likely to see serious displacement. What's your message to the people in those areas, and even those who are listening who have relatives in those areas?
Please take early warning information a bit seriously. Our staff, the general administration in those areas have enough information on where people need to move to. I think we're going to, the next couple of days, increase the level of clarity around answering that question. When we say move to higher grounds, what are those higher grounds where we are likely to set up camps? But let's just take the early warning information seriously. We don't have enough resources for search and rescue in the Tana Basin. I think it's a wide area. And if you are marooned, it is likely to take us a longer time to reach you. And I have to be very honest about this particular one. Don't take a risk hoping that if you end up being marooned, then people will come rescue you. We will do our best, but it is better we avoid that situation. So that's my first message. The second message is to the people in central Kenya and the highlands. Please pay a lot of attention to the groundwater and the stability of the ground. And so these are areas that are more prone to landslides. And this particular time, we are more concerned about landslide in these areas. So if you realize there is level of instability at that level of the ground, please give the early warning information and move to safer places. Let's just be a bit more careful. But more importantly, our hotline is open, 1199. If you want to pass any information around impending risks, call. We'll be happy to provide as much support as we can.
Okay. 1199, that's the hotline for the Kenya Red Cross Society. Thank you very much to Dr. Idris Ahmed, the Secretary General. He's been our guest.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.